Did you know that the Van Halen band dates back to 1964? And did you know there's a reason why Wolfgang Van Halen's last album was called Mammoth? We're going to answer those questions and talk about a lot more in this video. This video is a celebration of the band Van Halen and a celebration of the 45th anniversary of their debut album called Van Halen. So we'll be talking about all that in this video. Let's get started. So the story begins with the two Van Halen brothers, Alex Van Halen and Eddie Van Halen. They were both born in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, but they moved to Pasadena, California when they were very young. At this time, Eddie Van Halen was learning classical piano, and they started to play music together. At first it was Eddie on drums and Alex on guitar, but they eventually switched instruments. They kind of felt that the other instruments were best suited for the others. So the Van Halen brothers started their first band in 1964, and the name of the band was the Broken Combs. Then they changed their name to Trojan Rubber Company in 1972, and then they changed their name to Genesis. But then they realized that that was already a popular progressive rock band, and we all know who they are. And then they changed it to Mammoth, which is the reason why Wolfgang Van Halen named his first album Mammoth. So at that time, David Lee Roth was playing in an R&B rock band called the Red Bull Jets. David Lee Roth met the Van Halens, and they started a band together, and that's back in 1973. And they changed their name to Van Halen. So at that time, they were playing in California, mostly Pasadena, San Bernardino, Venice. And they also played some clubs in Los Angeles and West Hollywood. In 1974, they had to replace their bass player. Then they discovered this guy. His name was Michael Anthony Sobolewski. But it was a lot easier to just say Michael Anthony. So by 1974, they were playing some bigger name clubs in Los Angeles. They played some shows for the next couple of years, including the Whiskey A Go-Go on the Sunset Strip. So their first demo tape was produced by Gene Simmons. It was 29 tracks long. Gene suggested that they change their name to Daddy Longlegs. And around that time, they had a friend who knew Ted Templeman, so they asked Ted to check out the band. It took a couple of phone calls, but eventually Ted went down to see him. Afterwards, they were given a 2-year contract with Warner Brothers, and that brings us to the debut album called Van Halen. So Van Halen was released on February 10th, 1978, now celebrating its 45th anniversary. This was a very successful debut album. The album peaked at number 19 on the US Billboard 200 and over time sold over 10 million copies in the US. If you take a look at the album artwork, it shows photos of the band. These photos were taken at the Whiskey A Go-Go in Los Angeles, which was one of the clubs that Van Halen performed. It's not very long. The tracks are about like 35 minutes, 11 tracks. So let's talk about that. The opening song is called Running with the Devil. This song drew inspiration from a 1974 song by a funk band called the Ohio Players. They also had a song called Running with the Devil. The song is very iconic. It starts with some car horns, and they were actually taken from the band's own cars, and they placed it on a box, and they powered it with 2 car batteries and a foot switch. Ted Templeman came up with this idea of slowing the horns down before adding them to the track. The song was released at the beginning of the Satanic Panic. If you remember that Judas Priest were also under fire for heavy metal lyrics, something I'll talk about in another video, which is actually going to be my next one, because my next anniversary review will be Judas Priest Stained Glass, which actually was released on this same exact day. But back to the song, the lyrics of the song have been misinterpreted as being satanic. There have been many different interpretations to the lyrics, mostly being a reference to freedom. I don't really think anybody would listen to the song now and think it has any satanic background or anything like that. Now, next is one of the most important guitar songs ever recorded, and that's Eruption. This uses a technique called two-hand tapping on guitar. I know Eddie Van Halen was often credited as like inventing this, but I know there have been lots of, I think, jazz musicians who have done this. But I think Eddie was the guy who actually brought it to the hard rock world, so we can credit him for that. And it also shows that Eddie is a shredder and just a great guitar player. Next is a cover song of You Really Got Me. This was originally by the band The Kinks. So if you don't know 60s music, The Kinks were a British band. They were one of the first true rock bands, and the song works very well. It might even be an example of a cover song being better than the original. This was the first single. Eddie Van Halen wasn't really happy with the fact that the first single was a cover, but it was Ted's idea, and they went with it, and it's a very iconic song. Then Ain't Talking About Love. This is the third single, another iconic song because they play like standard guitar chords, but they pick the strings with distortion, so it ended up being a very iconic guitar riff. It's been considered a template for like 80s glam metal. It's very iconic. It's an iconic song. It's awesome. That's all I have to say about that. Next is a song, I'm the One. It's a pretty cool deep cut off the album. It's a song where they sing like, show your love, in the chorus, and kind of might be confusing. You might like think that's the title of the song, but it's actually I'm the One. And they do that like doo-wop vocal thing in the bridge. I'm going to attempt it right now. Whoa, ba ba da shooby doo wah ba ba da ba da shooby doo wah ba da. I don't know, something like that. Next is Jamie's Crying. Another song. This one tells a story about a girl named Jamie, and she has a one-night stand with a guy. She regrets her decision, and she wants to make things work, but the dude's not really into her, and she gets her heart broken. Typical high school love story. Then Atomic Punk, kind of a weird song title. It was a B-side to You Really Got Me. I think the thing that stands out on this one is the guitar effects Eddie Van Halen uses. He uses a phase shifter, and that's the one he used on the song Everybody Wants Some from the Women and Children first album, and that would come out 2 years later. So the next song is Feel Your Love Tonight. One of my favorite deep cuts. It's a little slower. I like the guitar riff. It has a nice groove. I like the vocal harmonies. It's just a fun hard rock song, and I don't know, that's all I pretty much have to say about it. And then Little Dreamer, they slow it down a little bit. The word I use for this song is just very like smooth. I mean, that's just the word. And it's a good deep track, and I like the chorus in that one. Then something different, Ice Cream Man. It's a cover song of an old blues song by a man named John Brim. This is one of the songs where David Lee Roth would often play acoustic guitar on stage. And it's a soft, laid-back blues song. The lyrics are filled with innuendos, but it's very memorable. And the final song is a hard rocker called On Fire. It's just classic Van Halen. Eddie Van Halen plays his signature distorted sound. His guitar is filled with some pretty cool harmonics. David Lee Roth gives a really great vocal performance in this one. And he lets out some of his screams. And it's another song with lots of harmonies that were all done by Michael Anthony. Good song. It's one of the heavy ones. It's typical Van Halen. Has all the components of a typical Van Halen song. That's all I'm going to say about this album. This is actually the second time I ever reviewed this album. The first one was like right after Eddie Van Halen passed away, and I wanted to do a tribute to him. But the anniversary came up, and it's time for an update. And plus, that was back in like 2020, and I'm a lot better at what I do, or hopefully. I think if you like dig for that old video, you'll see the difference. But anyway, check out this playlist. 2023 anniversary reviews. Next one, Judas Priest Stained Glass. See you in the next one.